second big Zoom experience. And so I want to thank the Becca and the Anderson Center team for partnering with us to do the facilitation of the meeting, because that allows all us GSDC folks to focus on content and not logistics. So thank you so much, Becca and team. And we've got a full agenda today, which will include a great update on the all-new St. Cloud Shines portal by Patty, followed by a great overview of the VEX Robotics program by Greg Flint, an update on our COVID-19 response strategies and the results of our 8 industry roundtables, followed by a great keynote speaker, keynote by Tawanna Black, followed by a Q&A session. And I'm your host this morning. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome 2 new board members. So first off, Laurie Hamen. She's the interim president of the College of St. Benedict, and we're really excited to have her join the board of directors of the GSDC. Laurie, would you like to say a word or two?
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm very, very enthused about the work of the GSDC and very happy to have been invited to join the board. I'm looking forward to the things that we can contribute from the College of St. Benedict.
Thank you, Laurie. And then next, we've added Michael Faber. He's CEO of Viking Coca-Cola Bottling Company, a real community advocate. And we're excited to have Michael join the board as well. Michael, would you care to say a word or two?
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to join the board, and I appreciate that. I look forward to getting to know the members of the board better and to contribute to the board. So I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Michael. Laurie and Michael come on the board at really a unique time, obviously, as we are trying to figure out how do we come out from this COVID situation stronger than we went into it. And so that's what the board is going to be focused on in the coming months. And as we get into the industry roundtables, you're going to see what that those actions will be based upon as far as what we've learned about the different industry sectors. And next, I want to turn the meeting over to our president, Patty Gartland, who will introduce our new St. Cloud Shines campaign. And this is so bright that, you know, you got to wear shades. So I'll turn it over to Patty. Patty?
Thank you, Brian. And yes, I'm so glad to see you have your sunglasses on. So these have been some really extraordinary, challenging months for our organization, our community, our state, our nation, our entire world. But today's meeting is filled with insights, inspiration, and commitment to a brighter tomorrow. And so for the next several minutes, we're going to be introducing you to the GSDC's most robust and in-depth marketing tool ever. So you'll want to follow the lead of Brian, and you might want to put your sunglasses on, because this innovative piece of work has really upped the amperage and shines our brightest light yet on our region. It's called St. Cloud Shines, and I'm hoping that you recognize St. Cloud Shines as the name we've been using extensively for well over a year now through our social media-based regional marketing campaign. This wildly successful media campaign has already garnered more than 100 million engagements by people from throughout the world. And now we're expanding the success of St. Cloud Shines brand even further. We're transitioning our current community website, the one that showcases all the great features of our community and its quality of life, along with our JobSpot website, into a new consolidated website called stcloudshines.com. Our St. Cloud Shines social media campaign will also continue forward. And in fact, it will get integrated into the new St. Cloud Shines website. The target audience for this website is younger people, students, young entrepreneurs, young families, and many more. It's cool, it's lively, and it's informative. And in keeping with the St. Cloud Shines social media campaign, it's focused on showcasing the countless positive things about our community. It will help us to shape tomorrow. Because we know all too well that if we don't shape it, others will. We all know our region has gotten its share of negative press, but by combating that with our positive stories, we will shape tomorrow. That's what this is all about. Ours is a region that is brimming with opportunity, and this is a tool to help make that known and to share our shine to an even broader audience. To introduce the website, I'm passing the mic over to Heather Piper-Olson, Chair of the GSDC's Marketing Committee and a GSDC board member. We're grateful to the many investor volunteers that serve on our marketing committee who worked with our project vendors, GSDC investors, data marketing, and Greenfield Communications, who helped us create this new marketing tool. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Patty, and hello, everyone. Today is very exciting as we launch what's going to be a powerful tool for attracting families, employees, entrepreneurs, and others to our region. You're the very first to see this website, which I invite you to explore further after the meeting. And please share it with your HR professionals, with your friends, with others in your life. So here's the homepage that we've had for the past few years. People choose which area they wanted and went to individual sites. One focused on our community and quality of life attributes, one focused on jobs, and the third focused on economic development. All three sites linked back and forth to each other. Now we've separated these sites for reasons I'll get to in a few minutes. First, let's see why the new St. Cloud Shines website is going to be so powerful. Patty mentioned the incredible 100 million impressions we've already made with the St. Cloud Shines on social media. We'll now link stories from our social media campaign and the stories people share about our area to this new website by the same name. This lets us get far more exposure and important engagement with people other than those that we've already had before. And all that engagement represents potential new employees for your businesses, students for your institutions of higher learning, families for our neighborhoods, and more. This slideshow is just part of the new homepage. And this one also shows more, this next one here, as does this one. As you can see, there's just so much there. We're pulling in the message all together, pulling in a message that says, this place gets you. And then we're going to cover every imaginable reason why it really does get you. From nightlife and recreation and outdoors, to cultural diversity, and to childcare. And then education, and many more categories, too numerous to mention. We shine a bright light on everything about our area. And that includes jobs. The GSDC's very effective JobSpot website, which as of this morning lists 4,415 jobs, is transitioning over to the stcloudshines.com. People will still find JobSpot using the web addresses they've used before, but now they'll also get there through St. Cloud Shines. It's a perfect match to have jobs so prominent on the new website. And right now you might be asking, what happens to the GSDC's economic development website? Or maybe that's something we all have been asking ourselves. But don't worry, it's still part of the stcloudshines.com. With a place for people to click through to all the economic development information, resources, and assistance available through the GSDC and its many partners engaged in supporting economic development. And those resources will also still be found at its original greaterstcloud.com web address. One more thing before I give this back to Patty. You might ask, why is St. Cloud Shines only marketing St. Cloud? And in fact, we're not. Just like the St. Cloud Shines social media campaign, it showcases the entire region. But we chose the name St. Cloud Shines for a couple of really compelling reasons. Our younger families, talent, young entrepreneurs will respond better to a livelier St. Cloud Shines name than to what sounds like a broad greater region name. And it's a perfect example of this branding is right down I-94. The Twin Cities isn't just Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's the entire region and all of the counties and metro areas and cities that involve that metro area. So as you see when you log into the website, all our greater St. Cloud communities are getting heavy exposure. It's not just St. Cloud.
Thank you, Heather, for your leadership in helping bring this all to life. As she mentioned, you as investors and community partners are the first to see this website. It's live right now, but its official launch to the broader public will actually take place in about 2 weeks. At that time, we'll be sending news releases around the state about stcloudshines.com. And we'll use our social media channels to officially launch on September 8th. And when the public views the site, they'll see this new section on our homepage. It's where we will recognize and promote the companies and organizations that are making this new regional marketing tool possible through their sponsorships and grant contributions. The companies and logos you see depicted at this time are those that have already signed on as a financial supporter. We first extended that sponsorship opportunity to the companies and organizations that are sponsors on our existing portals. But we have room and we have need for additional grant and sponsorship support. So we invite you and your companies and your organizations to consider being a sponsor and seizing this great opportunity for a high-profile presence and exposure with stcloudshines.com. Our St. Cloud Shines portal sponsors will get priority exposure in a variety of ways. We've created a variety of sponsorship options to consider. One-time transition grants totaling $30,000 is one option, or annual sponsorships for 3 years of $5,000, $15,000, or $25,000 per year are available. We'd love to explore these sponsorship opportunities with you. So that's our introduction. Perhaps some of you have already peeked at the website during this presentation. For the rest of you, please take a look sometime after today's meeting, stcloudshines.com. Thank you again for your support for this powerful new tool to promote all the greatness of this community and for helping us shine an even brighter light on our region. So back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Patty, and thank you, Patty, for a great presentation, and Heather for all your work leading the marketing committee. It's some really great work, and exciting that we can profile our region in a really positive way. Next, I want to turn to Greg Flint. He's the president and COO of Cold Spring, and he's been heavily involved, along with a lot of other GSDC investor companies, in the exciting VEX Robotic program in our region. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Greg, to talk about VEX Robotics.
Thank you, Brian. Quick question. There's a video to play, and I guess not exactly sure who or how we get the video started.
Becca will take care of that for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
At the appropriate time.
That time would be now.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg and Brian. All right, so I'm going to play the video in a moment. I'll ask everybody, make sure that you are on mute and that you stop your own video and camera so that we can have the best bandwidth possible for this brief video. So I will stop my video, and here we go.
VEX Robotics in Minnesota is one of the best events, sporting events that there actually is for students nowadays. With VEX Robotics, not only are students learning the technical skills that they actually need to be successful in a career, but they are learning all the soft skills such as teamwork, troubleshooting, critical thinking, being able to strategize and work with other team members. So it gives them all of the skills that they need to actually have a very successful life.
What got me into VEX? This is a 4-H sponsored team. I was big into 4-H, and then they said they had a robotics team. I was like, holy crap, robotics. And I really loved robotics when I was a kid, and I liked Legos, and that kicked me into going. And then, so I went and just joined the robotics team, and I loved it. And I went and built from there. This is my 6th year of doing it, and I just kept building every year, gaining more and more and more experience from it, and it's great.
I joined during 7th grade because earlier in life I had gone to a state fair and saw a bot match, and I immediately became interested. We started doing VEX about 3 years ago, and ever since then it's been a joy just to work and design.
Started in robotics when my school started having like a robotics club, or it's started being an official event at my school. So I thought I'd give it a try because I'd always been interested in like engineering and robotics, and I knew that that was probably the field I was going to go into.
VEX Robotics is a good opportunity to learn a whole lot of skills that are really applicable in the workplace. What they use for VEX Robotics is very similar to industrial manufacturing equipment, and the skills that you learn to troubleshoot and build and design and do problem solving for VEX is a huge benefit for looking for a job in the workplace eventually.
I think we're going to do really well. I think we're going to have a lot of fun, and I think we're going to work with some really great teams.
Greg, make sure you come off of mute again.
Cool. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Thank you for that introduction. And maybe thank you to Brian and the rest of the GSDC, Patty, Gail, and the folks for letting us tell the story and ultimately ask for your involvement. Prior to talking about VEX, what I'd like to do is get into the conversation of talent. And ultimately the question is, how do we as a community solve the shortage, the underlying shortage of people that we have in matching the skill sets of the open jobs that we have to the people that are out there? And so roughly 10 years ago, a few of us, of which Joan Schatz was one of, we were exposed to this thing called VEX Robotics. And we very quickly realized that there's more going on here than a bunch of kids playing with robots. If you start to think about VEX, what I would ask you to do is think about it from the standpoint of a lead generation system to your talent pipeline. What VEX does is it's introducing to kids the underlying needs of most of us in the way of opportunities for careers, opportunities for experiences that might cause a child to say, hey, this is something I'd like to do long term. In a lot of cases, they're having fun. And when you tell them, do you realize that you could turn this into a career? It opens their light, it creates light bulbs that go off, and it allows them to start to understand that, maybe I should pursue this farther. And that ultimately leads to them taking classes in school. And ultimately, it leads to you as someone who would support and get involved in this, creating a talent pipeline that allows you to watch these kids for a period of time, 4, 5, 6 years, with the intent being that you can nurture that talent to ultimately pursue a career path that ends up with them coming to you. From that perspective, we, Cold Spring, started down this path. We worked with the St. Cloud Technical College along the way, did a lot of work that led to us working with the high schools. So we specifically work with 4 high schools. This year, in conjunction with those 4 high schools, the Ricori, Kimball, Eden Valley Watkins, and Painesville schools, the St. Cloud Technical College, we're actually going to host high school classes on our campus being facilitated by the St. Cloud Technical College. So the point is, we're trying to build a talent pipeline. The talent right now is in those schools. And what VEX is doing is it's creating the platform that enables us to pursue and execute on that talent pipeline. What's extremely exciting is the talent is local. So from that standpoint, when we think about where do we get the future employees, they're already here. We're just using a unique way to introduce them to the opportunity to come work for us. From that standpoint, there's more to this than just I'll say the hard skills, the introduction to the specific content of electrical, industrial, and stuff like that. Here's where I'm going to expand the conversation and the concept. Whether you're a bank, whether you're a medical facility, whether you're a distribution center, regardless of the organization that you work with, ask yourself if the employability skills that are listed on the slide right now, if those are things that are attractive to you. So now think about it from the standpoint of where are future employees going to get exposed to these sorts of things? and the ability to solve problems, the ability to collaborate, the ability to respect supervision and monitor and work with teammates. All of those things are skills that are universal. Part of the VEX process is it's introducing those skills to those kids at an early age. It's fundamental to how the VEX program works. And so we would advocate that it shouldn't just be about manufacturing organizations. We would advocate that that this is broader, that we should be thinking about how to attract more people into this effort to utilize VEX. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. Which brings us to the need for your help. VEX is a self-funded program. It's currently housed under the St. Cloud Technical Community College Foundation. From that standpoint, the environment is going to be, the current program this year is going to be different, in large part because of what's going on with the COVID and things like that. So it's going to be more online this year. We're not going to be, what you saw was some video at the state tournament. We're not exactly sure how that's all going to play out this year, but the point is VEX is moving forward as part of this process. So when we ask for your help, we'll take help on all three fronts: time, talent, and treasure. If you do one thing as you walk away and you think about, is this something we should get involved in? Obviously, we'd love to have the treasure. We'd love to have the sponsorships and those sorts of things that enable a lot of the things like the state tournament to occur. But if you do nothing other than say, I want to learn more, that is really where the rubber meets the road. When you can be a judge and literally you're the one interviewing these kids, that's how you get introduced to them. That's how you start to think about, is this a kid that I'd like to ultimately bring onto my team? And then that allows you to start to have conversations about their long-term future, developmental opportunities, those sorts of things. At which point, that support is needed at both the high school and the state levels. We will follow this presentation up with some additional information from the GSDC after today. Which leads to the last slide. Ultimately, there's a bunch of us who are working together, and you'll see there's a predominant focus on the manufacturing side. We're inviting others to help and participate in this. If you're interested, reach out to anybody on this list. As I said, Joan is most intimate. Joan and I have been involved with this from the start. Aaron Barker has been the leader of this effort from day one. He and Andrew Ziegelmeyer those two, along with one other person, strong-armed the system to get it to where it is today. And we're now trying to put a system or a framework around that allows it to sustain for the long term. Joe and Shelley have joined us in this effort within the last year or two. At which point, if you're interested, reach out. And if nothing else, watch for the GSDC announcement to come shortly.
Thanks, Greg. Just really exciting stuff. One of the strategic imperatives of the GSDC is to shape tomorrow. And this is one of those true examples where VEX Robotics is shaping our tomorrow by giving these skills to these kids. And I just think I can't applaud the VEX Robotics team enough for the work you're doing. So thank you so much, Greg. Very important talent initiative. So next, we're going to move back to our respond, rebuild, and recover, which has been our phase strategy in dealing with COVID-19. And Patty and staff, I can't thank the staff enough. Leslie Dingman has done an outstanding job, as has Gail and Larry and Amelia. Everybody has been working really hard on pulling this all together. And so Patty's going to give us an overview on where we're at. Patty?
Thanks, Brian, and hello again, everyone. At our annual meeting event that we held on May 28th, we shared the GSDC's three-phase COVID response strategy. The first of our three phases was the respond, as Brian indicated, and that was our support phase. This was that 10-week period that started in mid-March, and we considered it our triage period when 100% of our focus was directed at assisting businesses and employees to access resources and financial assistance during that onset stage of the pandemic crisis. During that 10-week period, we fielded and assisted hundreds of businesses looking for information answers, resources, a connection, or advocacy of some form related to COVID-19. And we continue to do that work. It included accessing research, attending webinars, and collaborating with our regional counterparts in Rochester, Mankato, Duluth, and Greater MSP to help inform our efforts. It included producing what started as daily and is now a weekly e-briefing to share out timely information and resource connections to over 900 who are on our subscriber list, and to continue making that information available via our website. It included maintaining and supporting our talent portal, JobSpot, which has seen a dramatic increase in use, and included constructing a new platform on JobSpot, a B2B portal, to serve as a conduit for business-to-business employee pooling and sharing efforts. And it entailed being proactive in making outreach calls to more than 100 of our investor companies to learn how are they being impacted by COVID-19 and to offer our continuing assistance. So then in early June, we moved into phase 2 of our response strategy, our rebuild phase. This phase is where we've been digging deep and engaging in efforts to gain a granular view and understanding of the scope of impact that COVID-19 has had and is expected to continue having on the health and prosperity of our region. This phase has also been about building smart cross-sector solutions and partnerships to optimize all aspects of our recovery. As part of our phase 2 work, the GSDC hosted a series of 8 industry sector roundtables in late June that were attended by more than 80 industry thought leaders. In a moment, you'll hear more about the roundtable process from our board chair, along with sharing highlights from each of our sector facilitators. Going forward from today's meeting, our research will continue, and we'll continue accumulating feedback and input to help our board determine the best path forward when they meet in early October. And that is when we'll reach the final phase of our response strategy, which is being referred to as our recover and reimagine phase. This is when we take all that we've learned and discovered and translate it into new and renewed strategies and actions. We know this work requires continued engagement of business and community leaders that are thought leaders in our region in order for our region to persevere and thrive again. We will continue to make that happen because that is what defines the GSDC. I'm handing the mic back over to our board chair now to introduce our industry sector roundtables. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. And you know, I think it's really important to understand how what we did here, how it was done. First of all, in June is when we had facilitated all these 8 industry roundtable discussions and with industry sector experts and thought leaders in our region. The sectors that were selected are either significant industries in the greater St. Cloud or an industry sector that is projected to experience high growth over the next 3 to 5 years. GSDC convened these leaders to discover what is needed to help fuel recovery and revitalization and determine actionable steps that we as the GSDC and others can assist with or mobilize. This morning, I've asked each of the GSDC board members who facilitated a roundtable discussion to provide a brief overview of how their industry sector has been impacted by the COVID pandemic and the trends we may see in the future based upon that input. We're going to start off with Dr. Anissa Cheek, president of the St. Cloud Community and Technical College and a GSDC board member, really a passionate person making a difference in our community. And so, Anissa, I'm going to turn it over to you for our first industry update on the education sector.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Patty, as well. So for the education sector, it was my honor to be able to facilitate and to be in the Zoom space with all the other leaders that have a deep invested interest in education and how it is fueling the economy and helping to make a better and stronger greater St. Cloud region. So we talked a lot about the current impacts in the sector, the learning environments. We talked a lot about how home has become a new learning environment for so many of our students, and that looks different. So many of our students now are engaging in distance learning. We are still learning a lot about what that means, All of those home spaces are not created equally, and so carving out space for students to really be able to engage authentically in quality learning environments at home is something a bit outside of our control, but we know that we have to address in order to ensure that all of our students have access to a high quality education. We also talked about the mental health impacts on our students and our employees, for that matter. Feelings of isolation, loneliness, frustration, anxiety, stress, all of those levels are heightened and elevated, both in students and amongst our employees as well, who are working under these new conditions that are very much so still very unfamiliar for us. And so paying closer attention to caring for our employees so they're in a better position to care for our students continues to remain a focus area for us in the higher education industry, K-12 and higher education as well. And then finally, public education funding. Those of us in higher education and even in K-12 education believe deeply in the idea that education is a public good. And so challenges with funding continue to persist for us. The funding from our state has not kept up with inflation. And so we are often trying to find new and innovative and creative ways to do the things that we need to do in order to deliver quality education. So I'll talk briefly about the future trends in higher education, or future trends, not in just higher education, but in education. So for access and opportunity, so many times we're thinking about brick and mortar spaces, but in this new environment, we know it's well beyond that. So much of the conversation has been about quality, high-speed internet or broadband access for our students. For some of our students who live right in St. Cloud, they still struggle with access to high-quality broadband. And so even in this distance learning environment, they've been cut off, or their learning experience has been compromised because they are struggling to get access to high-quality broadband. So that's an issue that will remain with us for well into the future. In terms of equity, I think we all on this call recognize that equity isn't about access and opportunity, it's about outcomes. And when we look at our outcomes, K through 12 on into higher education, even into the workforce, we see the disparities. We see the disparities in outcomes, and those disparities are not sustainable for communities who want to be strong and healthy and sustainable into the future. And so we are looking intently at the source of those disparities and trying to make changes, systemic changes and adjustments related to what's going on inside of our classroom and in the services and supports that we provide to our students to ensure that across race and class, all of our students benefit equally. High touch versus high technology. We talked about relationships matter, right? You know, it's high expectations and high support. Our students need connection and they need relationships. Students don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so being able to build those deep and abiding relationships continues and becomes even more important in this technology environment where people feel physically distant from one another and emotionally disconnected from one another. It's impacting the learning and we're paying attention. The technology investments that we'll need to make will continue for us. We are having to rethink, you know, Zoom and Google Meets and all these other platforms where, you know, they've been around for a while, but we're getting up to speed. We're leveling up in terms of providing employees and our students with the resources they need to understand how we best leverage the technology investments that we need to make in order to facilitate and foster high quality learning. Professional development, skills development, really ties into the technology investments that we'll need to be making because our employees and students have to know how to use and leverage these technologies. And the education roadmap is something that continues to persist. All of these issues were with us before COVID hit, and it's only magnified the issue for us. And specifically with the education roadmap, it's the continuity between K-12 and higher education on into the workforce. Sometimes those transitions, they're big gaps. So we have to ensure for more seamless transitions and work more collaboratively and across those various industry sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Anissa. Great update. And, you know, it was I sat in on all 8 of these and every one of them was full of really engaged people. And you know, it was really great to get this type of input. So next, we're going to move on to the technology, infrastructure, energy sector and the current impacts there. Jeff Gao facilitated this session, but he sends his regrets. He could not be here today, so you're kind of stuck with me doing the update. So I'll do my best. The big impacts that we found in this area were, one is personal protective equipment and the lack thereof in the beginning of the pandemic, and then inconsistent use, and then how do we, protect our people going forward. The other thing that popped up was IT security. And we've heard about, Zoom bombers and all that. Hopefully we don't have one of those this morning, knock on wood. But all of these things around, as we become more dependent upon IT, obviously security becomes more important. And then also the whole workplace culture, working in a remote environment or a hybrid environment where you have some people working remotely, some not, creates some real culture concerns. So those were the three things as far as current impacts. And then as we look at future trends, obviously physical space is changing dramatically. Where do we go? Cube farms, that's obviously a tough one today. How do you keep people safe? How do you have large meeting spaces? How have appropriate social distancing, et cetera. The remote work and flexible schedules, with people having to be parents, they have to be parents, they have to be educators, homeschooling their kids, they have to do their jobs. It creates a lot of pressure on, with flexibility is needed in terms of remote work. And then some real need for automation investments. Obviously, when we become more dependent upon technology, we need to invest more in automation. So it's pushing that agenda forward faster. On the IT security side, again, that's going to continue to be a problem as we become more and more dependent on IT. Security really needs to be thought of. And I think every one of us needs to be thinking about that as we look at how we manage our organizations and being ever diligent on the whole security side so that we're not vulnerable to the evil that exists out there in cyberspace. Additionally, the supply chain was obviously disrupted during the pandemic. And that continues to be a challenge. So there's some major shifts changing there as far as domestic production of things versus international. And then again, broadband infrastructure investment with the, even around the St. Cloud area. I mean, if you go east toward Foley, if you go west toward Sauk Center, some major bad broadband spots which need to be cured over time. So those were the main trends that we saw on the technology, infrastructure, and energy sector. I just really think for everybody on the call, in your agenda packet, you've got the full details of each of these roundtables, and I really encourage you to study that stuff and see what impact it has on your organization, because some of our brightest minds gave input to this process, so I think it's very valuable. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ken Holman, CEO of CentraCare and a board member of the GSDC, who's going to present the findings from the healthcare and population health sector. Ken?
Thank you, Brian, and good morning, everyone. We had a robust conversation about what all of us are living and going through. And so there was a high-level comment that made us recognize that the current economic challenges that our region and country, and indeed the world face, have a primary initiative focus, and that is a public health crisis. Many other economic downturns have been caused by other fundamental business issues, but this is the first time in over 100 years that we have seen this kind of an economic impact from a public health crisis. We chatted quite a bit about employee and patient safety and protection. Not only is it important to understand that in terms of how we provide care and make folks safe, but also to get back to normal. This notion of managing the virus is extremely important, and following best science, and science does change with time, related to social distancing, masking. In other words, not only is it about good health, it's also about good business. We talked a bit about how the immediate response resulted in a lot of decreased business as we closed our elective procedures and clinic visits and all that stuff that all of you are aware of. And so how do we get back to normal? We spend a bit of time talking about normal. And that really is related to patient confidence. Do they feel comfortable coming to see us again? And do they feel safe coming back to see us again? And a lot of that, of course, is related to personal protective equipment. We talked about the unintended consequences of delaying or postponing care. We know that there are folks who, because of cancellations, had their overall care impacted because they were not able to get in and see us. We recognize that there are mental health issues related to the pandemic that need to be managed and understood. And so I think the conversation we had was very robust. And then at the end, we migrated a little bit to talk about what the new normal looks like. As you know, the new normal, it's been mentioned before by other groups, is how do we address community barriers and inequities? We know that the virus has drastically impacted different communities different. Our minorities, disadvantaged communities have been vastly more impacted than white majority communities. We recognize that as we go to more and more telehealth strategies, and this has been brought up before, that our broadband infrastructure and the cost of broadband is really important. How do we understand that technology is really important in healthcare, but also the human touch? We call that paradigm between high touch healthcare and high tech healthcare, and we need both. So how do we understand that balance between what people are looking for and what is the most efficient and safe way to deliver care? We talked a bit about the funding. As you know, the CARES Act and the federal and state government responses have been significant in lots of different ways. And so how do we understand the impact on that in the short term, medium term, and long term? And then we finished up by talking a little about how do we get back to normal? And that will require an understanding of the role of scientific advice, personal behaviors, masking, social distancing, as well as we approach a vaccine. We also talked briefly about how politicized masking has become and social distancing. And so one of the challenges is that until we reach some notion of herd immunity, which is, pick a number, 50 to 60% of Minnesotans and Americans either being exposed to the virus, having antibodies, or getting a vaccine, the coronavirus is going to be a significant challenge for us to manage. And so a vaccine is really important. But if we think we have political challenges with masking, we will have far more with vaccinations. So it's a great conversation. We all recognize the tremendous toll it has taken on not only our businesses, but our communities and the way in which we do our lives, whether it's church or going to a restaurant or seeing grandma and grandpa and all that stuff. And so all of us were anxious to figure out how creative folks can find the right balance between safety and innovation and try to get us back to a new normal. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Ken. Obviously a very critical industry sector in our community and one that impacts each and every one of us. So very, very important work here. And now we're going to turn our discussion over to industrial automation sector, which is the roundtable that's led by Rick Bowerly, founder and CEO of Granite Equity Partners. And Rick, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Hope you are well. We'll hear a lot of common themes that came out of our roundtable as well. One a bit more unique to us is freight costs, because the supply chains in to our industrial businesses and the distribution channels out have been disrupted to varying degrees across industries. And so as there are spikes in the flow of our raw materials and our finished goods, freight costs have spiked up and down in different ways in various industries. I believe some of that is normalizing now. We also talked a lot about technology access. Those companies that had already teched up did better through the last 5 months. Others who hadn't, invested, were working on investing, and all saw this as part of our future need. We had a really thoughtful discussion about workplace well-being, and certainly the physical health risks that COVID-19 present that Ken talked about. But we also talked about, all of the other dimensions of well-being that are challenged. Our livelihoods are challenged in our financial well-being. Our community well-being is challenged. We don't interact with each other. Our social and emotional well-being is being challenged as well, and our career well-being. Lots of people lost jobs or were furloughed. So we talked about the importance of us as owners, leaders, really caring for lives and livelihoods even more so during this time. We also noted that there are some well-being benefits: less commute, more time with family, and a few others that are also, a net positive. In terms of the future trends, I'm going to summarize this slide to say, the meta point was the need to adapt and innovate and really invest even more in all of the areas on this slide. And so invest more time, talent, treasure in technology access, in broadband, in all forms of automation, robotics, intelligence, machine learning. And then, as Greg talked about earlier, to invest even to make VEX sustainable and scalable even to a greater degree can be part of that solution. We observed that, in our region, there have been strong partnerships with higher ed and business over time, but that it's even more important in the future that we reach into deep engagement for that skill matching that Greg also talked about. In terms of facilities, rethinking what is the need for space, whether in an office or a laboratory or a plant, and potential reductions in the need for space on a kind of per business basis. And we talked about the supply chain. Will there be some reshoring, onshoring back from Asia or other areas? We're starting to see signs of that, but also just designing the supply chain as being very important so that we can have reliability and certainty in our supply chains that may well lead to more onshoring here. I would also say we had a few comments. Many of these things are about investment and efficiency to grow our businesses. But as has been said by Anissa and Ken, there are also significant equity issues at work here in technology access, in broadband access, in education outcomes and beyond. So we bring the efficiency and the equity lenses to the future as we think about this. Back to Brian.
Thank you, Rick. Again, this was a fascinating, as were all of these discussion. Again, look for the trends that might impact your world as well. Next, we're going to shift over to transportation and logistics and the current impacts. Paul Pfeiffer, GSDC board member and CFO of Anderson Trucking. To me, it's, I guess, ATS. Paul, take it away.
Good morning, Brian, and everyone else. Thank you. I don't think I'm probably going to say anything that is much different than what you've heard. The emerging themes, both in terms of current impact and future impact, are amazingly consistent between the different roundtables that we held. In our particular discussion, while we have a wealth of transportation and logistics companies and expertise in our region, we broadened our discussion out. So we had producers, we had transportation providers and enablers, and we had end users as a part of our discussion. And so we got a very broad set of discussions that were going. What we found is that regardless of where you're at in the supply chain, there were three things that emerged as kind of current impacts. The first is talent shortage, and whether that is related to transportation in terms of truck drivers and maintenance technicians, but it's also what Greg referenced before. There's jobs available potentially, but are the skill sets always matched to the jobs available? Second area is workplace culture that we had discussed, and again, we've heard that through some of the other board member presenters from their roundtables. The fact that people are working remotely more, the physical space that was being occupied before is maybe not now, or maybe not quite at the same occupancy rate. And so that's going to cause a change in terms of things that we have to deal with going forward. How do we still connect to our associates, our customers, given the distance, and how do we keep those personal interactions. The third area is on supply chain, and Rick just mentioned it in the previous roundtable. I think up and down the participants that we had, we saw people that had disruptions to their operations, whether that was material shortages, freight cost increases, supply chain source disruptions that caused them to have to change and adjust on the fly, sometimes in a more expensive way, but really, trying to understand and figure out how to deal with those particular challenges. So while those were the three things that we saw on current impacts, we did also see those as being three major items in terms of the continuing trends. And I think what it came down to in our discussion is there's just going to need to be a level of investment in three areas in particular, and that is education, which again has been talked about, and whether that's education in terms of matching the right skill sets to the to the jobs available to address the talent shortage, or if it's investment in infrastructure and technology. We heard a couple people talk about the fact that we don't have broadband coverage in many places in our area that we just took for granted before, but like us at ATS, we had 50% of our workforce working remotely, and we had a number of others that we would have liked to have been able to have the opportunity to work remotely, but they didn't have the broadband access. So again, additional investment in that infrastructure. We're also going to have potentially large amounts of physical space that are not occupied, and what creative ways are we going to come up with to to deal with that, so our areas don't start looking like ghost towns, but maybe more constructively utilized. And then the third is the change in supply chain, whether it's sourcing, where you're sourcing from. Rick mentioned onshoring versus offshoring, or the level of inventory that people keep in order to be able to make sure that they can respond appropriately to to whatever challenges they might have. So those were kind of the three specific areas that that we had talked about that we do expect to continue as trends that'll need to be dealt with.
Thank you, Paul. Another great update. Now we're going to move over to the business professional service sector, and GSDC board member and regional president of U.S. Bank, Mike Markman, led this roundtable, and so take it away, Mike.
Good morning, and thank you, Brian. One of the things that we really need to continue to focus on, and clearly there's overlap between the different topics that we had as far as current impacts. Certainly technology adaptation. We all learned really quickly how important it was to be able to adapt to technology and work in a remote environment. And we experienced broadband issues, and we had a lot of conversations about the gaps in service and coverage in the broadband space. Talked a lot about childcare and our employees and some of the unique issues that they're dealing with during this period of time. And then, as others have indicated as well, facilities management this has created everybody an opportunity to really hit the reset button and think about what is the right balance of space needed in order to move forward. And then the big one is certainly workplace culture, and how do we continue to keep our employees motivated? How do we continue to serve our communities and have an internal culture and teamwork that's necessary to really thrive as we move forward. As I think about future trends, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the workplace culture, mental health, and childcare. And I think there's a few themes here that are really important for us. As we think about childcare and remote learning, we're experiencing so much uncertainty of our employees as we think about these topics, and they manage or try to manage the uncertainty related to what does the school year look like, and how do we continue to support employees who are managing a work environment and their health care and their child care. And one of the areas that we spent a lot of time talking about is the financial inequities, and how do people from all financial incomes continue to be able to manage this environment. And I think it's really important. The other thing that we talked about is specifically related to mental health. And we all know that this that COVID is really impacted the things that are really important to us: family, health, financial well-being. And not only do our employees deal with this, but we need to help our frontline employees be aware of and help manage individuals who are dealing with these issues in their day-to-day too. And that's different. The pace is different, the trend is different, the intensity is different. And I think there's a lot of opportunity as we think futuristically. How do we help our employees deal with some of these unique issues that they're dealing with today, like maybe they haven't in the past? So those are some of the highlights from us, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Again, you continue to hear some common themes, and that, it's really important that we understand from a GSDC perspective, where do we want to, put our energy in dealing with this, hopefully quickly post COVID-19 environment. Next, we're going to move to the downtown business sector. And this one was selected primarily because of the huge impact that the downtown St. Cloud region has on our overall economy and social scene, et cetera. And so John Torgerson led this discussion, and I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Brian and Patty, and good morning, everyone. And thanks to Leslie for helping me facilitate this meeting. But what started off as kind of a focus on the food service and accommodation sector, because those sectors are probably the greatest hit took the greatest hit in our region from an employment and revenue basis. We were fortunate to expand it to include a lot of other segments: the entertainment segment, retail, health and beauty, and professional services, including legal and banking. And one of the things we found out, which should be obvious to us, but we had a lot of great discussion about how interconnected all the businesses are downtown. So when certain businesses declare work from home, there's less traffic. When St. Cloud State isn't in service, they're not having travel and the lodging needs aren't met. And when the Rivers Edge Convention Center isn't hosting trade shows, how everyone may be impacted, and just the foot traffic that affects everyone's business down there. So it was a great discussion. We also talked about the payroll protection program, and although most businesses qualified or applied for payroll protection, there were some questions around how do certain businesses apply, or do they qualify? And then really the unknown of the future, will these loans or payroll protection be forgiven? So I think Patty and her team were able to give some resources to the businesses downtown to help them with that. We had some healthy discussion about employment, and with the food service sector and accommodation sector, service sector, with relatively low paying jobs and the number of people impacted, and with the government assistance programs out there, those businesses were having a difficult time bringing employees back as they were allowed to open up and as their businesses ramped up. And then the last concern was really inconsistencies with protocols around the use of PPE and so forth. And although we're not we really didn't find it our role to help them out with that. I think it was helpful to get the businesses downtown together to discuss that so that they could work through it on their own. And I think some of the future trends we talked about were similar to, the other sectors, really a lot around technology, software, broadband use. What are we going to do in the future to enhance our e-commerce abilities, touchless transactions, and facility modifications to enhance social distancing or deal with consumers, customers, uneasiness about being in large groups. So really the ability to do so. So whether it's the entertainment world or accommodation and lodging or food service, they all have their challenges. And then just businesses in general, banking and legal and others, as they continue to work from home or find it easy to work from home, how do we have the broadband width to be able to support that? But I think they found it helpful to get together and talk about how can they're all in this together, they all impact each other, and how can they collaborate in the future to go forward and help strengthen downtown and continue to grow their businesses in a challenging environment.
Thank you, John. One of the things I think we can all do, in fact, I've been doing this, is as I've been talking to wait staff, I haven't been in that many restaurants, but usually dining outside. But one of the things I've found is a lot of their clientele is more demanding than they've ever been, and are really giving the wait staff hassles, etc. Just a lot of anxiety. So one of the things I've done personally is just up the amount I'm tipping people when I go out. And if you can do that, I think these people are well deserving. So thank you much, John, for that. Next, we're going to move to the advanced manufacturing sector, and our vice chair and GSDC board member Joan Schatz is going to lead this. Joan, since she's become vice chair, I've not been absent, so she hasn't had to lead one of these meetings, but I know soon that'll probably happen, maybe in the fall sometime. But anyway, Joan will lead us in the advanced manufacturing sector. So Joan?
Great, thank you, Brian. Well, many of our themes were very similar to what the previous facilitators have shared. I guess the three biggest ones in terms of current impacts of COVID-19 were the need to move to remote work quickly. The need to having to sell and market remotely also was a big point of discussion. And Anissa touched on the topic of high tech versus high touch. And for us as manufacturers, this is an issue for each of us that were on the roundtable. Don't necessarily think of manufacturers as high touch, but we have relationships with our customers, and step back and think about business really is all about relationships. And how do we effectively work with our customers going into the future, maintaining those relationships when we can't necessarily be in the same room with them, because there's a lot to be said for being able to be physically connected with them as well as just through technology. And then both of selling and marketing remotely as well as remote work, broadband infrastructure, and how that can either facilitate our business or hinder it, depending on people's physical location. One of the things that was interesting for us is that the topic existed, but we're magnified as a result of going through the COVID experience of talent acquisition, childcare, and transportation, which have already been touched on in all of the other areas. From a future trend standpoint, I think Rick talked about the need for ongoing and certainly automation for manufacturers is accelerating. It helps us not only to be more effective and efficient, but also helps us in some of our challenges around finding available talent workforce. In terms of talent, the need to continue to work in imaginative and new ways with our educational systems to develop the workforce that we're going to need for tomorrow, such as VEX, as Greg did such a great job of talking about earlier today. that will be an item that will be needed going forward. Remote workforce, we see this persisting in some sort of a format. And while there are some disadvantages to it, there are also a lot of advantages to it. So COVID-19 pandemic aside, it creates a tremendous amount of flexibility for our staff to be able to work more effectively. And indeed, many of us had found that we were actually more efficient with some people working remotely. Childcare and what's happening with the school districts and is driving a need for flexibility across our businesses. Mike Markman talked about the differences in school districts, and I know at Park Industries we've got something, I know, like 10 different school districts represented in our associate population, and so trying to support all of our associates across these different learning formats is driving us to be tremendously flexible, and I think that is going to be a theme for us going into the future. And transportation came up, I believe Rick commented on that as an item that became a challenge during COVID. And we see this as not just a temporary issue, but a persistent one. In our roundtable, there was an example that came up from Cold Spring, where in some instances, it's cheaper to ship something from China than it is from Minnesota. And so that is a challenge for us as manufacturers. So I will end with the themes where GSDC can really help and support the businesses in our region. First of all, internet infrastructure, workforce development, and continuing with the efforts there that GSDC has been involved with, childcare, and cost-effective transportation.
Thank you, Joan. Great update, and we apologize. There were a few technical issues there on the sound from time to time, but again, it kind of goes to the broadband infrastructure investment. So thank you, Joan. Okay, next we're going to move on to a very important topic, which is our keynote. And just to kind of frame this, the GSDC, and this was long before the murder of George Floyd, had been discussing at the board level the issues about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as we have been, all working on our own personal journey in this effort, we've been excited to be supported in these efforts by the Morgan Family Foundation with a substantial grant to help us fund some initiatives. And so in the continuance of that theme and truly wanting to make the greater St. Cloud region an equitable place for everyone and for to be a place where everybody wants to live and succeed and raise their families, et cetera, you're going to see that with our next presenter. But I am not going to introduce our next speaker. Huda Ibrahim, who is in our ML cohort, will take care of that. So Huda, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, all. It's an honor to introduce Tawanna Black this morning as our keynote speaker. My fellow Minnesota Young American leaders and I met and heard Tawanna last year, and we encouraged GSDC to consider engaging her. Tawanna Black is the founder and CEO of Center for Economic and Inclusion. Tawanna will provide an overview of the center's strategies and journey to building a regional economy that works for everyone in Minneapolis-St. Paul. Since launching the center in 2017, Tawanna and her team have been disrupting the ecosystem and equipping public and private sector leaders and institutions with the knowledge, skills, and tools needed to truly build a culture of shared accountability for closing racial income and wealth gap and creating a community of belonging. She will share tools for creating racially inclusive organizations, communities, and economic opportunity. Tawanna is a nationally recognized thought leader known for influencing, inspiring, and equipping cross-sector leaders to transform a personal conviction for equality into actions that produce equitable and thriving communities. For 20 years, Tawanna has led cross-sector collaborative, triple bottom line diversity and inclusion strategy development and economic revitalization efforts and organization in Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. In 2018, Tawanna launched the Center for Economic Inclusion, the nation's first organization dedicated exclusively to creating inclusive regional economies. As a founder and chief executive officer, Tawanna leads a team of people who equip leaders and institutions throughout Minneapolis-St. Paul region with the knowledge, tools, and resources needed to dismantle institutional racism, bias, foster shared accountability, and catalyze an inclusive, equitable, and growing economy. Please help me welcome Tawanna Black.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I appreciate that. And thank you so much to Patty and the entire board for welcoming me here today. I'm thrilled to be able to join you this morning and share a little bit about our work at the Center for Economic Inclusion. But more than that, I'm thrilled as a fellow Minnesotan to be able to have what I think is a very timely conversation with you about what we can do together to be able to foster inclusive growth, a more racially equitable community, a more racially equitable and inclusive community and state for all of us to live in. Because truly, right now, with what's happening not only in our own state, in our own community, certainly here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but all across our entire nation and indeed the world, we all have a lot of work to do to ensure that everyone in our entire community can thrive, can prosper, can write their own stories of the American dream, and that all of us have the tools that we need to be able to foster true inclusion in our own neighborhoods, communities, and businesses. And that is the work that I do with my team every day, and I'm thrilled to be able to share that with you here today. I want to start by certainly honoring the work that you all have been doing here in St. Cloud for some time, and certainly the work that your council has taken on to be able to explore what is the role for business leaders to be able to foster not only growth as a community, to be able to ensure that businesses are able to thrive, are able to move goods and services in ways that are economically feasible, are able to grow the economy by having workers who are able to do their jobs, are able to afford housing, are able to get to work in a way that is feasible with strong roads and roads that move those goods and services, but are also able to think about racial inclusion and the role that it plays in moving all of those facets of economic growth and development. My background, as you just heard about, includes doing work similar to the work that I've created at the Center for Economic Inclusion, but also includes having done economic development in other states, having helped businesses grow and thrive, having worked in the work of business attraction and small business development, having helped chambers of commerce and mayors grow the economy, but also helped neighborhood organizations grow and turn over, helped small business districts figure out how to both stimulate small businesses at the same time that they're trying to attract large national retailers into old strip malls that sometimes have lost their vibrancy. And at the same time, helping residents and neighbors figure out how to reclaim vibrancy that sometimes has been lost. That work also includes having helped large corporations figure out how to help people who often have been left on the sidelines of our economy begin to be included with not just some basic rules that we sometimes think we can write into our job descriptions, but with real intentionality, because that's what this type of work takes. But more than that, this work of racial inclusion and racial equity takes a focus on belonging. And that's what I hope that we can have conversation about today. If we could go to the next slide, please. I want to have some conversation about our mission at the Center for Economic Inclusion, which is about fostering cross-sector partnerships. It's about the civic infrastructure that it takes to be able to ensure that people throughout every sector and every layer of every organization actually have the tools that are necessary every day to figure out how we talk across difference, how we walk across difference in our organization. And while difference exists anytime that you get any group of people into a room, whether it is people like all of us who are on this call, or even if it's just a family of people, even, you know, within your own household, while all of us have been quarantined away, I'm sure that you have found out about some differences that you might have forgotten about before we spent this much time together, and just how important those differences become when suddenly you're spending not just a few hours in the evening with those family members you love, but lots and lots of hours. Suddenly those differences begin to make a real difference. And we need tools to work across those differences. We need tools to not just have tolerance, because who wants to be tolerated? You don't want to be tolerated in your home, and neither do people want to just be tolerated in their communities. People want to be appreciated. They want to be valued. And when it comes to economic inclusion, to get the truest value, the most important value from racial differences, we have to find ways to have real value for people. The people who seem to have the most difference from us, we have to find value in them and have the tools to find value in them and to show that value and to show that appreciation, because that's when we get the most value from people. That's when people show up and bring their full selves to the workplace, to the community. And by doing so, we start to actually drive that economic value in ways that we can actually prove the results from. And that's the work that I do at the Center for Economic Inclusion. And I want to spend some time talking to you about our journey, but then having a real conversation for you all about what it might mean, both in this organization, but also in the ecosystem of different economic development organizations, just different community organizations, organizations led by Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, to walk across those differences as a community in Greater St. Cloud in order to foster this strong economy. Next slide, please. And forgive me, Amelia, I'm hoping it works for you to run slides. If it doesn't, and you want me to, please let me just know that. The case for our work in this community across the state of Minnesota is really strong. Hit the next button, please. And that is that over 10 years in Minneapolis-St. Paul, despite a lot of effort across our region, across many different sectors, philanthropic investments, government investments at the state level and regional level, we only closed our wage gap between workers of color and white workers by 1%. This isn't just about people, the rhetoric that we often hear, people who aren't trained, people who aren't educated, people who aren't working hard enough. This is simply about racism. This is employers who pay people who do the same job different wages based on their race. This is unacceptable. This is what fosters people being angry. This is what fosters people choosing to opt out of the workforce. This is what fosters people needing additional supports from our government. When people are doing the same job, often, as the data shows, with greater education being held by people of color, workers of color, than their white peers, and yet not making the same wages. And this is what fosters a greater gap in wealth, which we all know moves our economy forward. Next slide, please. By seeing these gaps continue to maintain, we recognized in Minneapolis-St. Paul that we needed to be able to address this. And while I'm giving you data for Minneapolis-St. Paul, the data shows that this has been stagnant across Minnesota's economy. These gaps that we have not been able to close in our employment rates, in our rates of median earning gaps, and ultimately in our poverty rate. And this is what spurred us to say we needed a different way of approaching economics, not just the charity approach to say, let's give a little bit more here, let's have a few more services and programs there, but something that would focus specifically on the public and private sectors, drastically doing their work differently. A focus on employers drastically changing the way that they looked at racism inside the workplace, inside the business place. We recognized that when we looked at wages in particular, we weren't making progress. And that in order to address the problem of racism, our solution had to be focused on racism. not on programs, not on charity, not on community issues, but on that problem itself. And as you see this data here that comes from the Brookings Institution, where I'm a fellow, we had only narrowed the gap last year by $521. When we look at the economy in this metro area and how quickly it rebounded from the last recession almost 10 years ago, we know that that isn't enough for the average family to even have kept up with the inflation rates in rent, let alone the other costs that come with being able to raise a family in the market. So these disparities had remained stagnant. Next slide, please. When we think about then looking at how employers are solving for things, you can keep hitting that button. We recognize that while employers are trying to take on inclusion, they also are not making progress. And employers are struggling with being able to convince the employees, you can pause there, that the solutions they're trying to do and put in place, whether those are things like diversity and inclusion trainings, days about belonging and understanding, are also not convincing employees, the talent that they're bringing into their businesses, that they actually are committed to inclusion. So as you see here, this data from Accenture, that after 3 years of study, the last 3 years, that while most leaders inside businesses say, I think my employees feel like this is an inclusive environment, unfortunately, those same employees said, not so much. I don't actually think that I can bring my full self to the workplace. I don't actually believe that my boss, my superiors want me to really show up at this place and bring my full self. And more than that, if we close that gap by just 50% in the people who think that they're creating an inclusive environment and those who really feel it, we would bring more than $1 trillion to the US GDP. That's money that we all need. Every business owner, every CEO, every worker. Our economy needs those dollars funneling through it, especially at a time like right now. So these actions have to be taken in order to strengthen the economy of our city, our state, and our communities. Next slide, please. This is the case for this work, creating an economy that works for our entire community. These are the elements of creating that inclusive economy, fostering access to opportunity, upward mobility, and increased empowerment. These are the ways that we go about our work at the Center for Economic Inclusion. These 3 elements of an inclusive economy come from the Rockefeller Foundation, which has studied and explored what elements go into making all people feel like they have the tools and resources to be able to move up and down, side to side throughout a region's economy without having other people really controlling their own destiny, controlling a family's ability to choose, where do I live? Do I work for someone else, or do I have the ability to create my own business? Can I employ other people in that business, or am I really an entrepreneur who's doing this business as a hobby? Do I have the ability to not only earn income, but to build wealth and plan for the future? These opportunities to actually have families driving their own empowerment and to see that that doesn't only exist for families in one race, but families of all races and all ethnicities, that begins to determine whether or not we have an inclusive economy. And my friends, what we determined in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I'd encourage you to think about hard in your region as you chart this course is, if we don't have an inclusive economy, we do have an exclusive economy. There is not room for us to continue living in the gray because we're nice people. There isn't room for us to continue living in the gray because we don't think we have racism going on. If we do not have anti-racist policies in place, we do have racist policies in place. There is not room for us to live in the middle. And that's what our work has become about, is equipping organizations, equipping employers, and equipping leaders with the tools to drive anti-racism, economic inclusion in their institutions and in their businesses. Next slide, please. This work then becomes about what the tool building looks like. Next slide. For us, that work starts with these types of solutions. Solutions and tools that first center Black, Indigenous, people of color, and racial equity. You might ask yourself, okay, why? Why should we start by centering these populations and centering racial equity? The answer is really simple, and it's grounded in our history. Historically, the policies that were created to exclude these populations. If they were created to exclude these populations, that means they were created to center white populations. In order to then figure out how we undo that work, we must then center these populations, because those policies, those laws still govern our land. They still govern the operations of every business and every public institution in America and in Minnesota. For instance, it was just less than 2 years ago that Minnesota took housing covenants that prevented some neighborhoods from selling homes to Black individuals off the books. Just less than 2 years ago. We still had housing covenants on the books doing this. We had individuals just on a call last week from Ramsey County commissioners stating that they had gone to sell a parent's home and realized, oh wait, my mom's home still has a covenant on it that says who we can and can't sell this home to. These laws have been designed and then allowed to stay on the books because no one paused to look and say, wait a minute, this still exists. We need policies in place that center populations that have been excluded if we're serious about wealth creation and not simply operating around the edges of giving people a slight boost up. We also, though, need solutions that are data informed. Again, because this isn't about charity, but about economics, the data must tell us whether or not we're doing good. I could have an opinion, you could have an opinion, the next person will have an opinion, but the data will tell us, what are we doing? What is our solution? Are we doing it well? Are we not doing it well? And how do we know? Are we moving the needle to the point that we said we were trying to move it? And how do we start to foster accountability for that? And then we need solutions that are market responsive, because if we've just witnessed, the market moves rapidly, but too often we've been disconnected in our solutions from actually monitoring the market. We have not had private sector partners at the table for solutions that have often been targeted toward these populations that have been excluded. But if we are market responsive, if we are predicting things like how will the creation of autonomous vehicles impact our workforce development solutions and our desire to be able to push folks toward getting a CDL and moving toward driver jobs, that will help us drive workforce development solutions and determine who should be in those particular training programs based on age and when we know those autonomous vehicles will move forward in our economy. Just as a small example. We also have to think about the things that you see on the right of your screen. How do we think about solutions that both consider race, place, and income-based challenges? Where is affordable housing in our region? Is affordable housing located toward the places that we're attracting businesses that will need workers? If not, are our transportation and transit solutions connected to the gap between where affordable housing is located and where workers are needed? And are we strategically investing in that such that those same workers can afford, based on income and pay, to be able to get to work in an efficient and effective manner? If we consider those three variables in all of our solutions, we're more likely to be intentional about not only helping workers and helping employers, but ensuring that we're moving people up the economic ladder. And lastly, when we think about economic development, human capital and workforce development, transportation and access from a home ownership and affordable housing perspective, we can no longer afford to have solutions that allow themselves to operate in silos. You and I get up every day as leaders and depend on our workforce development, economic development, transportation, and housing solutions to work effectively and to work effectively together. But for a very long time, we have allowed those solutions to operate in deep silos when it comes to people at the lowest levels of our economic ladders, to their detriment, and frankly, to the detriment of employers. At this stage, we can no longer afford to do that, and we have to start to depend on those solutions to work together. But that requires us investing differently. Us, whether we're in philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, private philanthropy, us as taxpayers, as policymakers, requiring intersectional, interdependent solutions across those domains that, again, are reinforcing the need for intersectional things that require us centering the populations that have been excluded from our economy. Next slide, please. As we work those strategies, we also then think about how we support employers and how we support policymakers. In our organization, we go about that work in these three ways. We foster shared accountability. What gets measured gets done. I'm certain that you do that in your business. For us, though, when it comes to the issues of economic inclusion and racial equity, unfortunately, we have not taken that approach. If we had, we would have closed those gaps by much more than 1%. So our organization exists to do that by ensuring that our region starts to have accountable measures that are transparent to the entire region, to the entire state, and that we drive accountability. When organizations receive dollars, whether those are public dollars or private dollars, people should know about it. And they should know what is going to be done with those dollars, such that if it's not, someone is accountable for that and it starts to move. And that someone should be employers, that someone should be policymakers, and it should be organizations. But there has to be shared accountability, and we have to be doing that work together. We do that by bringing people together on a regular basis and keeping the goal as the main thing. We also do that by helping policymakers and employers dismantle systemic racism and oppression inside their businesses. Again, if racism is the problem, help for Black, Indigenous, and people of color is not the solution. The solution is dismantling racism where it exists. The help that is needed is to repair the trauma that has been done by racism. And certainly plenty of that has been done. But we keep having the solution be training more people of color, helping more people of color, boosting them up, while we allow racism to continue to exist inside the workplace. So we're sending people who have been trained back into a place where they're not welcome. We will never close the gaps in employment and wages as long as we're continuing to send people into a place where they're not ready to be received. We've got to close that gap. So our work begins by consulting with employers, supporting those employers and addressing the gaps that exist in their understanding about how to undo racism. Not diversity and inclusion training. Most employers have a lot of that. That diversity and inclusion training, as you saw earlier in the Accenture data, has not closed those gaps. The ability to equip employers with what is needed to actually understand how to undo racism within the workplace, how to close wage gaps, how to close policies and procedure gaps, how to undo gaps in job descriptions that are overinflated. We have the data. Now we need the tools and the resources to undo the behaviors, to undo the same behaviors as it results in procurement, to undo the same behaviors as it relates to investments in philanthropy, and then to drive shared accountability for the results. We do the same type of consulting with the public sector in economic competitiveness in supporting our cities, our counties, our regional and state government, and all with measurement, so that we're holding them accountable, but they also get to hold the center accountable for our ability to equip them with results that we can measure not in 1 year, but over 5 and 10 years. Because if we can't sustain this, we cannot turn our economy around. And lastly, in cultivating place-based opportunity. Every city in America has those neighborhoods that we all put that black eye on and say, let's stay away from there. Those neighborhoods won't thrive. We could see those same neighborhoods be our places of greatest opportunity to connect our challenges that we often see at the regional level. If we were to start to think about the places, the people in those neighborhoods as our greatest assets in solving for regional gaps and opportunity. And that's the work that we do in order to drive racially equitable employment, racially equitable wealth, and growth and prosperity by having this framework of increasing awareness of leaders, increasing awareness of employers, driving racially equitable actions that can ultimately lead to strong and shared accountability. Next slide, please. I just walked through some of these tools for shared accountability and what it takes for employers, business leaders, and policymakers to hold themselves and one another to this standard of accountability. When we launched the center, we were asked by several people, largely elected officials and policymakers, and many CEOs, Tawanna, can you change the name of the center to the Center for Accountability? Because we think that often we know what to do, but there's no one who will hold us accountable. And what I said back was, I hear you, but there's not a stick I can get that's big enough for me to whack everybody over the head every day to tell you what you should do if it's really true that you know what to do. And I actually don't think that's true. I think that people who know what to do it. I think that when you know better, you do better. But I think that often people don't know what to do. I think that often we have been told we're good people, we have ideals and beliefs of inclusion, but we don't know what to do. We're stuck. And that's what we exist to do. is to bring to bear those solutions that can help people with what to do, how to move from just believing in diversity and believing in inclusion to knowing what's the nitty-gritty behind that, behind the belief, how to actually walk the walk of being not just not racist, but being anti-racist. What in the world does that mean? And how do I do it if I want to do it? How do I help my neighbor do it? How do I help my friends do it? How do I have those conversations that I've been told I'm not supposed to have for 50 years? How do I do it? That's what we help people do, the tough work, to equip, to fuel investments, and then to connect that to economics. Because while I would love to believe that it's the hard work, and it is, the economics work is where people can start to connect this and then sometimes work their way back to the hard work. But ultimately, accountability is what counts, because if any region had not closed any other gap by more than 1% affecting any other population over 10 years, a whole lot of people would have lost their jobs. But because this was about Black people and Native people and Latina people and Asian people, really nobody paid much attention until we started blasting it every day, all day long. And people pay attention right now and they say, that girl won't shut up. And her team won't shut up. And they will not go away. But oh my gosh, they're right. And it's connected to dollars and cents, 30 billion of them actually for Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a whole lot of them for St. Cloud. And so we have to make it about accountability. And we have to make it about belonging, because ultimately, if I don't belong, then you don't actually belong either. And it ultimately starts to hurt all of us. But it can help all of us if we're intentional about it. And that's the work that we've got to do together. Next slide, please. And that's the work that we do together. We play this role of not only equipping organizations, but also strengthening our ways of being together, because there are many organizations in our regions. We work with lots of chambers in cities and suburbs, lots of business organizations, nonprofit organizations, community-based grassroots organizations, governments of all sizes, large corporations, small businesses, churches, schools, colleges, you name it. And it is about all of us being at the same table, not having just the parking room conversations and parking lot conversations and thinking that you were actually at the decision-making table, but then finding out there was actually a whole other conversation where the real decisions were made, but really working to drive accountability about the need for us to be one strong ecosystem where we have bridge building happening and relationship happening. And it's hard, it's very hard, but we have to learn to be one. We have to learn to have those decisions happening as one. We have to learn to have those decisions happening. And that is our work at the center as well, is to do that bridge building, to create more chairs at the table, to figure out how and why it's hard for us to have those open conversations, why we feel the need for the executive table and the next kind of executive table, and then that grassroots table over there, and to force those tough conversations. Next slide, please. This is an example of what I mean, where you see large national partners like the Brookings Institution and the Shared Prosperity Partnership. You see large national corporations like US Bank and others, but you also see grassroots organizations, and you see a mosque, you see large or small organizations and nonprofits, but you also see government organizations like Ramsey County and the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce and Accenture. All of these organizations are our partners, and we work as often as we can to be able to bring them together like this instead of just elbow to elbow, because we believe that that's a big part of our recipe. Next slide, please. We support this work with data, the indicators for an inclusive regional economy, which you can see on our website. Next slide, you can go through these kind of quickly, that allow leaders to be able to understand the ways of looking at 14 indicators of inclusive regional growth that our partners throughout the region helped us identify, that we have shared now with cities across the country who want to understand how do many factors that each of us live with every day, from how many people are being denied a mortgage who make more than $100,000 a year, and are there discrepancies of that by race, to is affordable housing for apartments available And are there discrepancies in that by race? It turns out not so much in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but it turns out that is the case in other cities. To things like, how are people graduating from 4-year degree schools versus 2-year degree schools? And do we have discrepancies by that? To wage growth, to all sorts of things in these 14 indicators, but you can drill down in this data all the way down in some cases to the census tract. And we update this yearly. We're going to release it again in December and monitor it on a regular basis. And we help everyone from cities and suburbs over to small nonprofits not only understand the data, but then connect to organizations and businesses who are doing something about the data so that we can all connect data to action and hold ourselves accountable. Next slide, please. This work of linking the data to action is what has to happen inside our businesses, inside our schools, inside our communities. Next slide, please, in order to move action. We consult, you can keep going, with businesses with an assessment that helps businesses and employers understand what's happening inside their businesses, how well their wages, their benefits, their ways of being, their ability to create a culture of belonging is actually resulting in meaningful change inside their own organizations, and how well their employees are taking their own values back out into their communities to drive economic growth and change. And then we provide consulting services to those employers to help them walk the walk of anti-racism, racial equity, and inclusive growth to drive meaningful economic change. Often employers think it stops at whether or not I have a minimum wage that is meeting the threshold of my community, and whether or not I'm doing good charity with my philanthropy to a few organizations that are racially equitable or diverse in my community. There's so much more to being an employer that can create economic change in your community and really upholding those values. And that's some of the work that we help employers from small businesses to very, very large businesses do in our community. Next slide, please. We do similar work with the public sector. Next slide, please. Helping employers, in particular the public sector, understand how to grow economic competitiveness and inclusive growth at the same time. And this looks at everything from a group like Met Council and our first regional economic framework, and ensuring that our Black, Indigenous, and communities of color are deeply embedded in that work and partners in that work, not just invited to contribute to it, but partnering in that work, over to a group like Ramsey County, who's building the first economic competitiveness and inclusion study and plan for 10 years in the state right now, alongside communities, to ensure that their racial diversity is a factor and driver in their growth and not viewed as a thing to look at on the side in that work. Next slide, please. All of this is about the opportunity that we have to ensure that our racial inclusion, our racial diversity is our best asset in moving our state forward. And I would add that it has to be for us, but it will only be when we take full advantage of belonging and inclusion in everything that we do every day. Next slide, please. We are here to be a partner for you in ensuring that we know what to do as it relates to not only the ways of being, but really responding to this moment. This is what we've offered to business leaders, policymakers, and everyday leaders throughout our state. What we can do together to stop what is happening to us, not just because of what we've experienced in 2020, but certainly because of it. Taking a stand for dismantling systemic racism and the systems that we are experiencing right now is important for each one of us. But going beyond that and measuring progress, being willing to call out what your goals are. If you're starting at ground zero and have one goal, that's fine. If you've already made progress and have had a diversity and inclusion program and you are willing to go further than that and have several goals, even better. But measure that progress in transparent ways with your community so that people know what they can expect from you in a transparent way. And invest in and alongside communities. Ending racism requires transferring power in ways that few are willing to acknowledge and accept, but I can promise you we will not get there without that transference of power. It is not going to work simply by inviting people to the table occasionally to be able to add their voices. Next slide, please. Some examples of that, next slide, please, that we'd love to share with you are how to walk this journey personally and institutionally. There are many events that you can attend. I've been grateful to be able to watch several that are taking place in St. Cloud right now, and I'd encourage you, participate in the events that are being held by your own communities, whether it's your local NAACP, your local faith groups that are taking place in your community and led by your various communities. Attend those, participate in them, take your families to them, not just wearing your work hat, but as a resident. Hire, whether it's the center or other organizations, to work in your businesses, and speak up against racism when you hear it. Build deeper relationships with the people in your own business, in your own neighborhood, and do business with BIPOC-owned businesses. Next slide, please. And we'll leave this as a leave behind for you, but there are ways that you can take action inside your own institute to be sure that you are growing good jobs in your community, that you have a way of measuring that you're investing in growing the economies that exist within Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. This is an economics play. We can measure this work economically, but we can't do so with a charity lens. It must be one that measures whether or not wealth is actually moving inside those communities, and trust that you have the expertise, as you know very well, but it's never too much to be able to re-emphasize that that expertise exists within communities, and therefore the people must also be invested in, and that you're aligning your policy agendas with those agendas that are coming from communities. And that's one that often gets missed within the private sector. Next slide, please. I want to be able to share this with you that we have a summit coming up in December, and so there's an opportunity for you to be able to learn alongside our leaders, and this will be digital, so it's one that'll be easy to be able to participate in from St. Cloud as well. I wanted to be able to create some time for discussion with you all about what it is that you think can be done in St. Cloud. There is an opportunity, you can go to the next slide for just a discussion holder, the next one. There's an opportunity for you all here in St. Cloud to think about what this organization can do to be able to foster economic growth, inclusion, and racial equity, not only as a leader, but also as that ecosystem builder, as that partner in communities of color, with communities of color, and alongside business leaders and institutions. And I'd love to be able to hear, but also discuss with you what role each of you play and what role you see this organization playing in moving the economy and the community forward in this way, and what roles you see us being able to play in support of you. But I'd also love to be able to answer questions you might have about our journey.
Well, thank you, Tawanna. Just really a wonderful talk, and I think I just can't say enough how much we thank you for being our keynote today. You know, it kind of strikes me that you know, we've had two tsunamis. One is COVID-19, and the other was the murder of George Floyd, which really exposed a lot of you know, real issues in our community on so many levels, and so. You know, I was glad we were slightly ahead of some of that in our thinking, but we've got a lot of work to do. So I've got a number of questions for you, and I'm going to be facilitating these questions. I'll give credit to where the questions come from. Jonathan Wong, one of our Yelp cohort folks, said, asked if you could speak more about the lack of skilled employees and skills gaps that are commonly named as barriers to hiring marginalized populations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to Jonathan for that question. Certainly, the skills gap is certainly one barrier that comes into play for employers, and there are some barriers that are real, and then there are some barriers that I appreciate the way the question was worded, and then there are some barriers that are overinflated. And so I think it's important for employers to be clear about which barriers are real and then which barriers are overinflated. So there are two ways that I would approach that. One is to do a strong audit of what skills are necessary. And so one of the things that we see in the data is that when the economy is really strong, HR departments it's a proven fact, right? That we tend to add a good amount to our job descriptions of requirements in order to lower the amount of applicants that are applying for a job. And so, right, so when the economy is strong, we tend to see a ton of applicants that are coming in. So we tend to add a lot of things to the job descriptions. And then when the economy is weaker, we never pull those things back out. And so what employers can do is go through our job descriptions and say, what do we actually need? And that's one of the things that we've done with employers. What we often find is that sometimes we find, okay, we've got a bachelor's degree requirement, but we actually need is a GED, or we actually need is this 2-year credential. So let's be certain that we have the actual requirements for the job to be sure of that. And then if we know that, okay, yep, what we actually need is what we've listed here, and we're still not seeing the applicants come through that we need, then what partnerships can be established to ensure that we're bringing people in and we're training people from those populations? So if there's a specific racial group that is applying for the jobs that do not have the skill set that we need, then let's be targeted about getting the training in. And so whether that is training with a potential community college, training with a nonprofit workforce development agency, but let's be very specific and targeted. And one thing I would give you, last week I did a training on Friday with 300 of Deeds employees, and many were from the workforce development division. And one of the things they shared with me is they are having a barrier with getting specific workforce development trainings in specific languages. So Karen language was one, which is in our Asian population, and there was another language they were having trouble with, and they had not identified community college partners who could provide the training in these languages. Well, we do know we have community-based organizations who have people who speak these languages. And so some of this can be about asking Deed to be partnering up with community colleges and those organizations. And if they know they have employer demand, that's going to accelerate the extent to which they make those investments and ensure that the employers are doing that work and getting the talent that's needed.
Thank you. Next question. You had talked about the 14 measures that you're measuring in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. How difficult is it to obtain that data, and is it something that would be readily available to us in the St. Cloud region?
Absolutely. It's really easy. centerforeconomicinclusion.org. If you go to that website right now and then click on indicators on our website, you can go straight to it. You can drill down to any of those data points that you would like to. So that would give you the 14 indicators. It would give you the indicators for the 7-county metro. Now, in terms of being able to look at it for St. Cloud, if you have, I don't know if GSDC provides this info for, as a data hub for you, but if not, any data-based organization or college that does data for you that has Tableau would be able to take the indicators that we have and pull that same data for you. And we've done this with cities all across the country, from New Haven to San Diego. And these indicators, I would tell you, are strong. The committee that worked on them for us assessed to get to the 14. Rockefeller has 164 indicators. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, we assess theirs, about 5 different national sets in order to shrink down to 14. So it's a pretty solid set in order to get you off to the right start. But anybody who's using Tableau would be able to pull that data for you for St. Cloud.
Thank you so much. Another question, when you talk about transferring power, what do you mean by that?
Great question. Transferring power, I would give you an example for our organization very recently. In the development of the regional equity or economic framework for Minneapolis-St. Paul, and this is a framework, I don't know if St. Cloud has a CEDS strategy, a comprehensive economic development strategy for the EDA or not, but many regions across the country have a framework for being able to get funds from the EDA nationally. These frameworks in some regions are just developed by whomever is the economic development authority. In other regions, they've taken a very community-based approach to say the populations who are going to benefit from or be most impacted, which is often communities, residents themselves, or business owners, have to be at the table to create the plans. Transferring power is to say, we're not going to just create it because I'm the CEO and my colleague, Commissioner Zelli, Chair Zelli at Met Council is the chair there, and he can create it. And Peter Frosch is my colleague at Greater MSP. So the 3 of us could get together and our staff and we could create the plan. But that would be 2 white men who are very accustomed to having power and 1 African-American woman who's had a decent amount of power herself. We are going to benefit some from those plans, but not nearly as much as the business owners who have just lost significant amounts of wealth and history through the impacts of COVID-19. and the workers who have lost drastic amounts of money through COVID-19 and the subsequent uprisings following Minneapolis-St. Paul's reckoning with decades and centuries of racism after George Floyd's murder. Transferring power looks like having the courage to pause and say, let's make sure those individuals are at the table and they are not just informing, but they are creating that strategy so that we know their voices inform us, that they help us understand what exactly do we need to have in that strategy, and that we don't just invite them to a focus group, but they literally help us write that strategy, that they help us set the goals and the metrics so that our aspirations are not so limited by our limited view and experience, because we don't know what it's like to walk in those shoes. And we might set a threshold that's here when we need to set one that's here because we have not walked in their shoes. We as leaders who hold privileged positions have to get accustomed to transferring power if we have any hope of actually getting to equitable wealth and income in our communities.
Thank you very much. Well, it just seems like we're at one of those inflection points where we can really be a shining star here or be status quo or worse. So I think as a community, we have a lot to come to grips with. So with that, I've got a question from Matt Verlick. So are there some places that have really had great success with this that you could share?
Absolutely. That's a great question as well. I would give you a couple of examples. I want to give you one here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I'll give you one that is not in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So one local that I would give you is Atomic Data. And this one gets mentioned some. You've seen a forward story, but I'll give you a back half of the story. So Atomic Data is an IT firm that has both a front end and a back end of training workers and placing workers who do both help desk types of things. So your computer is having trouble, you can call them and get help with your computer, but they also do a ton of technical services for IT. And Atomic Data's owner, Jim Wolford, contacted us. I co-chair at Itasca Northside Partnership focused on North Minneapolis. And he contacted us several years ago and said he had some interest in starting to hire African-American men and women from North Minneapolis. And that was great news to hear. And subsequently, he established his own partnership with Summit Academy OIC, an organization that trains typically men from North Minneapolis. And Summit had not done IT training before that, but he established a new partnership and began working that. Fast forward, Jim has built that partnership on his own, has had success hiring people and training them for IT careers, a good paying career. But he ran into the barrier of people not having good housing and affordable housing or affordable childcare, and people quitting the job and quitting the training because of that barrier, and chose to purchase housing and put people in the housing because it was that important to him that he kept this workforce in order to grow his base. And he called us to say, hey, Tawanna, can your team help me figure out, can other CEOs do something similar? Because he was seeing people move from his company up the economic ladder to higher paying jobs. And we said, no, but we can help you with a systemic solution to actually solve for the housing and the childcare barrier. And he has brought his team in to really work on that long-term solution of how do we avoid the benefit cliff where people have had childcare benefits, but when they hit a certain income base, they lose that childcare benefit. And there's a better incentive for them to quit work than there is to stay with that job and move out of it. And this happens to employers and workers all across the state. And our state hasn't solved for it in the way that other states have across the country. Where I would take you to South Carolina, where they've been, I partnered with them several months ago. And since then, they're the first state to pass, a city there has passed a reparations bill and has been able to address that benefits cliff such that they're not seeing it. That's why I gave you the two examples where they're not seeing employers lose workers and workers lose their ability to stay in jobs, secure affordable childcare, secure affordable housing, and move up the ladder. And I gave you that because Minnesota has the highest childcare cost in the country and growing challenges with affordability for housing. And when we solve those two barriers, we solve it for both workers and for employers. and begin to close these gaps that can really hold back our economy.
Great, thank you. We are running over here, and I apologize for that, but it's such an engaging topic, and we've had great presentations this morning. I'm going to ask one more question of you, Tawanna, and then I've got one for Ken, and I'm going to answer another one, but we've got to do this quickly because I don't want to, we don't want to hold back the economy. The question is research shows that professional groups of color, and this is have been leaving Minnesota due to a lack of cultural connectivity and racism. Can you explain what's being done to retain that talent?
Great question. Absolutely. The research does show that there are several efforts in play, both regionally and across the state, to be able to address this. Certainly the Make It MSP effort here in the Twin Cities has been very active with larger employers and with social groups based in communities of color to both survey on this point, to be able to foster more connected ties with professionals of color, to be able to address the retention barrier, and to begin to address both the cultural pieces, but also those barriers of racism, and start to close those barriers. And I don't think it's a fast solution. I also think more conversation, particularly in COVID-19, where many employers on the corporate side are saying to employees, you can go work wherever. We've seen, I think, a rapid flux of particularly younger professionals who have gone back to wherever home was and said, I don't like it here anyway. If I can work from Atlanta, I'm going to do that. If I can work from Chicago, I'm going to do that. The chances of those folks coming back, I think, is slim to none. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but certainly those efforts and coalitions that have been built and started are a good part of the solution, and keeping it present in rooms like this is I think, a huge part of the solution.
Thank you so much. Just an outstanding presentation, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.
So Amy Trombley had asked a question about broadband being a community-wide issue and what can we do together. One of the things that when it comes to that whole issue is, as you saw in all those roundtable discussions, it's a huge thing. You can expect, if you are a elected official, if you are in the technology sector, any of the sectors, that whole issue of broadband connectivity, we will be working as a community to try to make inroads into that. So as we finish the revision of our strategic plan, I think there's no question that will be part of it. So you'll be hearing more from us on that. And then a question from Matt Foster to Ken from CentraCare. What are the current trends at CentraCare on the COVID situation?
Just some high-level numbers. There are over 73,000 cases of COVID in the state of Minnesota. Stearns and Benton County account for just under 4,000 of them. There have been roughly 1,900 deaths. We have currently in place inpatients and ICU patients who have COVID, and our testing, while increasing, there's been 1.4 million tests in the state so far. There is an increasing positivity of tests throughout the population. So far, we are managing it just fine, and we appreciate everybody's support. But the coronavirus is alive and well in Minnesota, Stearns and Benton County, and in all the 22 counties we serve.
Thank you, Ken. And so now I'm trying to, lots of thanks to you, Tawanna, really from the group. So I hope you're watching the chat box there. And then just in closing, you know, Carol Turnow has been chairing our DEI initiative with the board to develop our strategy, and obviously we're really excited about that work and where we're headed with that. But I really want to give hats off to Carol. These are tough issues that we're working on, and some that you know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's going to take a while, but we are committed to making a difference here. So as we look at, so I want to thank you all for attending today, and also to let you know that the Anderson Center, in collaboration with the Morgan Family Foundation, the United Way of Central Minnesota, and the GSDC, have been collaborating to offer unconscious bias as a way to really improve your understanding of these issues around bias. And can't thank our collaborators enough. I've been through it. It's a great program. A number of other board members have been through it. It's really outstanding. So I really highly encourage you to sign up for one of those courses so that you can expand your knowledge in that area. And just in closing, stay safe. Thank you for all you do to grow the greater St. Cloud economy and to make this a great place for everyone to live and to prosper. So have a wonderful day. Go make some money and make a difference.
And Brad, Joe, Aaron, Cassie, Megan, if you need anything, if you have any follow-up questions, let us know. If you need help leaving the meeting, let us know. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much.